I learned about this guy, Dan Wootton, from following Johnny and Amber. Now, Dan news came out, it exploded on the scene, and I covered everything I could. I thought I covered everything, but when I look back about a month or so, it seems like there's quite a bit I missed. So this here is called the Dan Wootton case, why Byline Times is right to probe the dark side of the media. And he says the media, meaning not only Dan Wootton, so we'll see what else comes out as we go on in the future, but obviously sticking to Dan for a while. This here is from a site which is self-titled, the same as the person writing the article. Looks like his name's David Henkel or something like that. Sorry if I'm getting it wrong. It starts off, journalists hold a unique position in a democracy. They are the only people with the time, energy, and hopefully a decent salary to investigate matters of public interest that the rest of the people are too busy or exhausted to have the time and space to devote to it. Assuming that they're doing that on goodwill and looking into the facts, but alright. I get his point about their role and that they're the ones that do this with their time. They're no-hold-bars investigations of dodgy politicians, the royals, the entertainment industry, and business scandals fill our screens, print pages, and social media every day. Undercover investigations expose malpractice and treatment of vulnerable people. The only caveat to that is some of the media spend loads of money pursuing celebrity gossip and tittle-tattle that they believe the public are interested in, rather than devoting cash to expose scandals from whistleblowers in the public interest. Well, of course. I mean, it is a business, it's ad revenue, and it's kind of news when someone famous does something. Because, I mean, if someone famous, let's just take Meghan Markle as a random example, virtue signals, gets a bunch of money from something, but she wasn't being honest about it, well, that's people's money they put in, and they might want to know not to put in money next time or to really think about it. So, whilst it's not actual news as far as danger out there, economy, things like that, it could affect enough people to make the cut. But there is only one area where there's a wall of silence, and that is the media itself. Unlike everything else, which is fair game, journalist practices are off limits. And then he mentions this person, Levison, who I'm not familiar with, but let's see what he's got on the surface. And then he'll mention Byline Times, who, as you know, is investigating you-know-who, Dan Wootton. Now, I am not one who wants huge regulation of the press by the state, but I supported the Levison inquiry, and it was a mistake not to have the second part of the inquiry, which would have examined in detail what happened over the phone hacking scandal that affected more than one national media organization. Why couldn't the media be put under the microscope in a judge-led inquiry, just like we were doing with the pandemic inquiry and the Post Office Horizon scandal? In this column, I have no intention of going into detail of the Dan Wootton case. You can follow that by reading Byline Times and his reaction to the stories on GB News and Twitter, now called X. I am upholding the right of journalists to investigate other media if people come to them with allegations of malpractice, just like they would with any other area, and sadly, most mainstream media avoids doing so, which is the truth. I mean, it's probably not that these media places have some big political thing, that they're not on Johnny's side. It's just probably that they don't like to investigate their own. Because if they do, then they might get investigated, and most likely, they've got things to hide. So that does make sense. Not only is malpractice not reported, but the BBC tried for years to avoid scrutiny on how well it spends its money and protects its household name, journalists, and commentators from revealing their salaries. You may have noticed in the last few weeks that the salaries of the top BBC presenters have been highlighted in the news. BBC's attempt to avoid scrutiny. And then he goes on to this part here, BBC's attempt to avoid scrutiny. He says that two successive Auditor Generals took on the BBC, which claimed it was a special case and could not be scrutinized by the National Audit Office. So what I'm getting here, the bottom line is that the BBC has squirmed its way out of things going public about it. I'm sure some things have, but on the whole, seems like there's huge deliberate suppression. And he ends here with this: misrepresentation of Byline Times by Dan Wootton. Once again, this guy agrees and reinforces that the Byline Times is not hard left, as Dan called it, because Dan is on the right. But let me say, Dan was on the left, now he's on the right, so I don't really trust exactly where Dan is. But honestly, it doesn't make a difference. The thing is, the allegations and what's being said. There's a whole different conversation as to what that means, being right or left, but as far as if he did it or not, well, that's just based on evidence. Sometimes I personally do think politics come into cases, especially when considering the fan bases and who takes what side for what reason, but in this case, I don't see the politics seeping in. Dan was accused of videotaping people without their knowledge, so either he did that or he didn't. And as a reminder, there is a nice article about evidence and passwords as a little bit of proof. So it's not just he said, she said at this point, or he said, whatever you want to say, because the victims were men, but they've got something. The guy's asking for donations, but I guess that's kind of common these days. So let me know what you think. I'm doing shoutouts, special thanks, things like that. Following Dan Wootton, waiting for more big updates, so I'm covering what I can that I missed. And if you're not subscribed here, consider it. If you don't, I'll be sad, but I'll get over it. See you next time. You may have noticed in the last few weeks that the salaries of the top BBC presenters have been highlighted in the news. In the news. Take two, take three, I can't say it. Deep breath. Relax. I guess that counts as an outtake. Take four. You may have noticed in the last few weeks that the salaries of the top BBC presenters have been highlighted in the news. In the news. Take 5.